Imagine a world where nobody ever got sick. Ever. Your great-great-great-grandparents, they might still be around, complaining about the youngsters. The Black Death, the Spanish flu, even the common cold, poof, gone from history. This isn't just a world without sniffles. It's a world so different, you might not even recognize it. Number 10. Falster would be totally remodeled. If disease simply never existed, the entire landscape of medicine and healthcare would be something out of a parallel universe. Think about it. Doctors' waiting rooms wouldn't be filled with coughing kids or adults fearing the flu. The very job of a doctor would transform. A huge chunk of medical specializations today focus on infectious diseases. Virologists studying viruses, epidemiologists tracking outbreaks, immunologists understanding our body's defenses. All these fields might not exist or would be tiny niche areas, perhaps looking at very rare non-pathogenic biological quirks. Hospitals, those vast complexes we see in every city, would likely be much smaller. There would be no need for infectious disease wards, intensive care units packed with pneumonia patients, or the constant battle against hospital-acquired infections. What would doctors do then? They'd likely focus on the things that could still go wrong in a disease-free world. Trauma would be a big one. Accidents on the roads, at work, or at home would still happen. So, trauma surgeons, orthopedists, fixing broken bones, and reconstructive surgeons would be in high demand. Childbirth, while not a disease, carries inherent risks, so obstetricians and midwives would still play a crucial role, though without the fear of maternal or infant infections that historically claimed so many lives. The pharmaceutical industry, a global giant, would be a shadow of its current self. The billions poured into developing antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, and vaccines would never have been spent. There would be no race for a new flu vaccine each year. No urgent quest for cures for things like HIV or hepatitis. Drug companies might instead focus on pain relief for injuries, treatments for congenital conditions, those you were born with, assuming they aren't disease-linked, or perhaps ways to manage the non-disease aspects of aging, like joint wear or vision decline. Or maybe they'd pivot entirely to lifestyle drugs, cognitive enhancers, or cosmetic treatments. Medical research would follow a completely different path. Instead of deciphering viral carmems or bacterial resistance, scientists might dedicate their efforts to accident prevention, technology, developing safer materials, or understanding the fundamental limits of tissue repair after injury. Public health departments wouldn't be running vaccination campaigns or issuing warnings about seasonal illnesses. Their focus might shift entirely to safety regulations, urban planning for accident reduction, and perhaps mitigating environmental hazards that could cause harm even without disease, like chemical pollutants. The very tools of medicine, from stethoscopes, less need to listen for lung infections, to complex diagnostic labs, no need to identify pathogens, would be different. It's a world where health means something far more related to physical integrity and perhaps mental well-being rather than a constant fight against invisible invaders. Number 9. Your family reunions would need a stadium. Picture your family tree. Now, imagine that almost everyone ever born on that tree, barring accidents or violence, is still alive. Without diseases cutting lives short, especially in infancy, childhood, and young adulthood, families would be enormous. Your great-great-great-grandparents wouldn't just be names on a chart. They could be active members of your extended family, sharing stories from centuries past. Family gatherings would be colossal events, potentially involving hundreds, if not thousands, of relatives, spanning many generations. Imagine trying to remember everyone's name. This incredible longevity and survival rate would reshape the very structure of society and family life. Multi-generational households wouldn't be a choice or a necessity for some. They might be the absolute norm, with homes needing to accommodate dozens of family members. Concept of elderly would stretch and warp. Would someone be considered old at 80, 150, or 300? The wisdom and experience held within a single family unit would be immense, with direct knowledge passed down through countless living generations. Think of the stories, the skills, the history contained within one household. However, this would also bring unprecedented social complexities. Inheritance laws would need a complete overhaul. How is property divided or passed down when the original owner might live for centuries after their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren have reached adulthood? Transfer of wealth and assets would become an incredibly tangled affair. The economic burden of supporting so many people would be immense. People live for hundreds of years but still experience age-related frailty, not disease, but perhaps the body just wearing out slowly. The period of dependency could be very long. Who would care for the extremely aged, and for how many decades or even centuries? Population pyramid, which typically shows a wide base of young people narrowing to a small tip of older people, would look more like a rectangle or even an inverted pyramid if birth rates eventually fell. This demographic shift would impact everything from housing design, needing to be adaptable for many ages and abilities, to social services and resource allocation. The psychological impact of having such deep family roots and so many living ancestors would also be profound. Would it create a greater sense of belonging and continuity, or perhaps overwhelming pressure, and a feeling of being a small cog in a vast, familial machine? The very definition of family and individual identity within that collective would be different. Number 8. Cities would be giant and graveyards gone. One of the most visible changes in a world without disease would be the landscape itself, particularly our cities. Graveyards and cemeteries, those often sprawling, somber green spaces found in or near every settlement, might not exist at all, or would be tiny plots for victims of accidents. Think of all that land freed up. In densely populated areas, this could mean more parks, more housing, or more public facilities. The rituals and industries associated with death, funeral homes, coffin makers, tombstone carvers would be drastically reduced or entirely absent. But the absence of cemeteries would be contrasted by an explosion in the living population. With disease not culling populations, cities would likely swell to unimaginable sizes. Imagine metropolises stretching for hundreds of miles, or cities building ever upwards, with skyscrapers reaching new heights to accommodate everyone. Population density could become incredibly intense, leading to a complete rethinking of urban planning. How would you move tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions, of people within a single urban area every day? Public transport systems would need to be on a scale and efficiency we can barely conceive of. This massive concentration of people would place an unbelievable strain on resources. Providing clean water, food, and energy to such megacities would be a Herculean task. Waste management alone, dealing with the garbage and sewage produced by billions, would require revolutionary technologies and systems to prevent cities from becoming uninhabitable due to their own byproducts, even without pathogenic diseases. Pollution from industry, transport, and human activity could become a primary health concern if not managed with extreme care, potentially causing respiratory problems or other non-disease ailments through sheer toxicity. Housing would be another colossal challenge. Would we live in tiny, hyper-efficient pods or vast communal complexes? The design of buildings and public spaces would have to prioritize safety and efficiency for huge crowds. The risk of accidents, like fires or structural collapses, would be magnified with so many people living in close proximity. Emergency services, fire departments, accident response teams would need to be incredibly well organized and resourced. On the flip side, with no fear of epidemics sweeping through crowded areas, public spaces like markets, theaters, and stadiums could be even more vibrant and packed, though managing crowd safety would be paramount. The very rhythm and feel of city life, the constant hum of an immense disease-free population, would be unlike anything we know today. Number 7. History books would be missing their scariest chapters. The course of human history has been profoundly shaped by disease. Remove that factor, and the story of our past becomes almost unrecognizable. So many pivotal moments, societal shifts, and the fates of empires were tied to microscopic organisms. The Black Death, in the 14th century, for example, wiped out a massive portion of Europe's population. This led to labor shortages, which in turn contributed to the decline of feudalism, empowered peasants, and arguably paved the way for the Renaissance by shaking up old structures. Without the plague, Europe's social and economic development might have taken a very different, perhaps much slower path. Consider the colonization of the Americas. European explorers and settlers brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which indigenous populations had no immunity. These diseases decimated native communities, in some cases wiping out up to 90% of their numbers. This catastrophic population collapse was a major factor in the ability of European powers to conquer and control vast territories. If those diseases had never existed, the balance of power could have been vastly different. Indigenous nations might have maintained their sovereignty, resisted colonization far more effectively, or negotiated terms of interaction from a position of strength. The Americas today, culturally, politically, and demographically, would be a completely different place. Think of other historical pandemics. The Antonine Plague and the Plague of Justinian severely weakened the Roman Empire, contributing to its eventual fragmentation and the subsequent Dark Ages in Europe. Without these devastating outbreaks, perhaps Rome's dominance would have persisted longer, altering the development of Western civilization. The 1918 Spanish flu, which killed tens of millions worldwide just after World War I, had a massive global impact on demographics and societal morale. Its absence would mean millions of lives saved and potentially different post-war societal trajectories. Even warfare itself would change. Throughout history, more soldiers often died from disease in camps and on campaigns than from actual combat. Dysentery, typhus, cholera. These were the invisible enemies that could cripple an army. Without this threat, military campaigns might have been longer fought in different terrains or seasons, and the outcomes of many wars could have been altered. Exploration and trade, too, were often perilous due to disease. Sailors on long voyages faced scurvy, a deficiency not infectious, but often grouped with shipboard ailments and tropical diseases. If these risks were removed, global exploration and the establishment of trade routes might have happened faster or involved different peoples and powers. Essentially, the entire tapestry of human history would have to be rewoven with many of its darkest threads missing. Number 6. Our dinner plates would look unfamiliar. The food we eat, how we prepare it, and even how we grow it are all deeply influenced by the existence of disease. If pathogenic bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi simply weren't a factor, our relationship with food would be transformed. Think about food safety rules, cooking meat to specific temperatures to kill coli or salmonella, pasteurizing milk to eliminate listeria or tuberculosis bacteria, carefully washing fruits and vegetables to remove contaminants. Many of these practices might be deemed unnecessary. We might eat a lot more raw or minimally processed foods with far less fear. Sushi might not seem risky, and steak tartare could be everyday fare. Agriculture would see revolutionary changes. Plant diseases wipe out significant portions of global crops each year. Without blights, rusts, wilts, and viral infections affecting plants, harvests would likely be far more abundant and reliable. This could mean more food security globally and perhaps less reliance on monocultures, if a wider variety of plants could be grown without constant disease pressure. Similarly, animal agriculture would be different. Diseases like foot and mouth, avian flu, and swine fever cause massive economic losses and necessitate culling of millions of animals. Without these, livestock farming could be more stable and perhaps less intensive in some ways. The widespread use of antibiotics in animal feed to prevent disease and promote growth would be unnecessary, potentially changing the meat we consume. Food preservation techniques developed over millennia to stop food from spoiling and becoming dangerous would also evolve. Salting, smoking, pickling, and fermenting are all methods that create environments hostile to harmful microbes. While spoilage from non-pathogenic organisms would still occur, food would still rot eventually. The urgency and methods might change if the primary concern wasn't deadly pathogens but simply taste and texture degradation. Fermentation, for instance, might be pursued purely for flavor development rather than its preservative and probiotic qualities, as probiotics relate to gut flora, which is linked to immunity. Global food trade could also be simpler and more extensive. Many import-export restrictions on agricultural products are in place to prevent the spread of plant and animal diseases across borders. Without these concerns, fruits, vegetables, and animal products could move more freely around the world, potentially diversifying diets everywhere. However, the sheer abundance of food resulting from disease-free agriculture, coupled with a massively increased human population, would still present challenges for distribution and equitable access. The flavors, textures, and safety precautions surrounding our daily meals would be a world away from what we currently experience. Our kitchens and supermarkets would tell a very different story. Number 5. Being clean would have a whole new meaning. Our modern obsession with cleanliness is largely driven by the germ theory of disease, the understanding that invisible microbes can make us sick. Without disease, the very concept of clean would likely be redefined, focusing more on aesthetics and comfort rather than hygiene for health. Think about how often you wash your hands. We do it after using the restroom, before eating, after touching public surfaces, all to prevent the spread of germs. In a disease-free world, hand washing might become a far less frequent ritual, perhaps only done when hands are visibly dirty or sticky. Public sanitation infrastructure like complex sewer systems and water treatment plants was largely developed in the 19th and 20th centuries in response to devastating cholera and typhoid outbreaks. If these waterborne diseases never existed, the impetus to build such expensive and elaborate systems might have been much weaker. Perhaps rudimentary systems for waste removal would exist to combat odors or for aesthetic reasons, but the high level of water purification we expect today might not be standard. The ick factor of sewage might drive some sanitation, but not the life or death urgency disease provides. Consider medical settings. Principles of antisepsis and sterilization pioneered by figures like Lister and Pasteur revolutionized surgery by preventing post-operative infections. If wounds from accidents or surgery didn't get infected because pathogenic microbes don't exist, then the rigorous sterilization of surgical instruments, operating rooms, and even the scrubbing routines of medical staff might be far less stringent or approached very differently. The focus would be on successful repair of physical damage, not fighting an invisible microbial enemy. Social customs related to cleanliness would also differ. Sharing food and drinks might carry no perceived risk. Concept of personal space, sometimes subtly influenced by a desire to avoid catching something from someone else, might be smaller. Spitting in public, now widely considered unhygienic, might not carry the same taboo. Our homes might be cleaned for tidiness and to remove dust or grime, but the vast array of antimedicated soaps, sprays, and wipes that fill supermarket shelves would likely not exist. The battle against germs is so ingrained in our daily lives, from childhood admonitions to wash hands to public health campaigns, that removing it would fundamentally alter our behaviors and our environment. Cleanliness would be about looking and feeling pleasant, not about staving off a constant invisible threat to our health. Number 4. Art, stories, and music might miss their darkest muse. Disease, suffering, and the fragility of life have been powerful and persistent themes in human art, literature, and music for millennia. From ancient Greek tragedies depicting plagues sent by angered gods, to medieval paintings of the danse macabre, spurred by the Black Death, to Victorian novels where heroines tragically faded from consumption, tuberculosis. Illness has provided a deep well of human drama and emotion. If disease never existed, a vast swath of our cultural heritage would be missing or profoundly different. Imagine literature without the consumptive cough of Mimi in Puccini's opera La Bohème, or the cholera epidemic in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera. What would Shakespeare's plays be like without the frequent references to plague and its societal impact? The fear of sudden, inexplicable death from illness has fueled countless narratives exploring mortality, fate, faith, and the human condition. Without this particular fear, storytellers would need to find other sources for high stakes. Conflict and existential dread. Perhaps accidents, natural disasters, or interpersonal conflicts would take on even greater prominence, but the unique horror and mystery of disease would be absent. Visual arts, too, have often grappled with illness. Paintings depicting lepers, plague victims, or even just the anxious bedside vigils of loved ones capture intense human experiences. Personification of death, often as a skeletal figure like the Grim Reaper, is frequently linked to his role as a harvester during epidemics. If death primarily came from old age or accidents, its artistic representation might be less fearsome, perhaps more akin to a gentle departure or a sudden tragic event, but not a relentless consuming force like pestilence. Religious beliefs and philosophical outlooks would also be affected. Many religions incorporate rituals for healing, prayers for the sick, and explanations for suffering caused by illness. Deities of healing and medicine are common across cultures. Without disease, the nature of these beliefs might shift. Problem of suffering, a central question in many philosophies and theologies, would still exist due to other causes of pain, but the particular type of suffering caused by widespread, often terrifying illnesses would not shape our spiritual or philosophical inquiries in the same way. The human struggle for meaning in the face of inexplicable sickness has produced profound works of art and thought. While human creativity would undoubtedly find other outlets, the specific cultural expressions born from our long battle with disease would simply not be there, leaving our creative landscape perhaps a little less shadowed, but also missing some of its most poignant masterpieces. Number 3. Our bodies might be shockingly different. Constant threat of disease has been a major driving force in human evolution. Our immune systems, incredibly complex networks of cells and proteins designed to identify and destroy pathogens, are a direct result of this evolutionary arms race. If disease-causing microbes never existed, it's highly probable that our immune systems would be vastly different, perhaps far more rudimentary or even repurposed for other biological functions. We might lack the sophisticated antibody responses, the specialized white blood cells, and the immunological memory that currently protect us. This could have wide-ranging consequences for our biology. Genetic diversity within human populations is in part maintained by the varying pressures of different diseases. Certain genes offer advantages against specific pathogens, so populations exposed to those pathogens will see an increase in the frequency of those protective genes. Without this selective pressure, our genetic makeup might be more uniform in some respects, or different sets of genes might become more common, selected for by other environmental factors or by pure chance. Traits that make us susceptible to certain diseases today might have persisted without consequence. The very definition of health at a cellular level could change. Much of what our bodies do internally is geared towards defense and repair from microbial attack. What would all that cellular machinery do in a disease-free world? Perhaps our bodies would be less robust in some ways if the constant challenge of fending off invaders never honed those systems. For instance, our response to injury might be different. Inflammation, a key part of the immune response to both injury and infection, might manifest differently or be less pronounced if its infection-fighting role was never needed. Furthermore, while the prompt specifies disease never existed, it's worth considering how broadly disease is defined. If it includes all pathogenic infections, what about conditions arising from genetic predispositions that are currently triggered or exacerbated by infections, or autoimmune conditions, where the immune system mistakenly attacks the body? If the immune system itself is rudimentary, perhaps autoimmunity wouldn't exist either. However, if we still aged, the natural wear and tear on our bodies, arthritis, failing eyesight, organ decline not directly caused by a pathogen, would likely still occur. We might live lives free from infectious sickness, only to face the slow decline of aging as the primary health challenge, making gerontology, the study of aging, an even more critical field, though focused purely on the non-pathogenic aspects of growing old. Our physiology, shaped by an environment devoid of microbial foes, would be a fascinating but alien landscape compared to what we know. Number 2. Retirement would last for centuries, maybe. In a world untouched by disease, lifespans could extend dramatically. If people commonly lived for many decades, or even centuries, beyond what we consider a normal lifespan today, the entire concept of a working life, followed by retirement, would be turned on its head. Currently, many societies structure education, career, and retirement around an average lifespan of roughly 70 to 90 years, with a working life of perhaps 40 to 50 years. If individuals regularly live to be 150, 200, or even longer, what would career even mean? It's unlikely anyone would, or could, work in a single job or even a single profession for over a century. People might have multiple distinct careers throughout their long lives, perhaps retraining and re-educating themselves several times. The idea of retiring at 65 and then having another 100 or 200 years of life ahead would necessitate a complete rethinking of personal finance, social security systems, and pensions. How could any system support individuals for such extraordinarily long periods of non-work? Perhaps retirement as a complete cessation of work wouldn't exist. Instead, individuals might transition through different phases of contribution to society, with periods of less intense work or different kinds of engagement as they age. The accumulation of knowledge and experience would be immense. Imagine having leaders, scientists, artists, and tradespeople with a century or more of active experience in their fields. This could lead to incredible advancements and a deep societal wisdom. However, it could also lead to stagnation if older, established generations are resistant to new ideas or change, holding on to positions of power and influence for very long periods. Pace of societal change might slow down, or conversely, it might accelerate as new solutions are built upon vast stores of accumulated knowledge. The very definition of old would shift profoundly. Someone aged 100 might be considered to be in the prime of their life, or perhaps just entering middle age. Intergenerational relationships would become even more complex and layered than discussed with family structures. How would a 30-year-old manager supervise a 150-year-old employee with far more life experience? The psychological and social adjustments to such longevity would be enormous. Society would need to find ways to keep extremely long-lived, populations engaged, purposeful, and integrated. Leisure, lifelong learning, and community involvement would become even more critical components of a fulfilling, centuries-long life. The economic and social models we currently rely on would simply be inadequate for such a dramatically altered human lifespan. Number 1, the sheer number of us would reshape the planet. If disease never culled human populations, the single most overwhelming consequence would be the sheer number of people on Earth. Throughout history, disease has acted as a grim but powerful check on population growth, from high infant and child mortality rates to devastating pandemics that wiped out large percentages of adults. Remove this check entirely, and assuming birth rates didn't plummet to near zero spontaneously, the human population would explode to levels that are difficult to truly comprehend, potentially many billions or even trillions over time. This colossal population would exert an almost unimaginable pressure on the planet's resources. The demand for food, fresh water, energy, and raw materials would skyrocket. Even with agricultural advances from no plant or animal diseases, feeding trillions of people would require converting vast swaths of the Earth's surface to farming, likely leading to massive deforestation and habitat loss for virtually all other species. Competition for dwindling resources could become a major source of conflict, even if people weren't fighting over land due to displacement by illness. The environmental impact would be catastrophic on a scale far exceeding what we are beginning to witness today. Pollution, air, water, and soil, from human activity, industry, and waste generated by trillions, would reach critical levels. Climate change could accelerate dramatically due to greenhouse gas emissions from such a massive population's energy needs and activities. Earth's ecosystems, already fragile, might collapse entirely under such an immense human footprint, leading to mass extinctions of plants and animals. The planet might become a human-dominated world in the most extreme sense, with little room left for nature as we know it. Faced with such overwhelming numbers, societies would likely have to implement measures that seem drastic by today's standards. Extremely stringent population controls might become a global necessity, with governments regulating the number of children families could have. Urban environments would become incredibly dense, as discussed perhaps with humanity, living in towering arcologies or vast subterranean cities to conserve surface land for agriculture or what little wilderness remains. The drive for space colonization might become an urgent imperative, not just for exploration, but as a desperate search for new resources and living space. Ultimately, a world without disease, while free from one kind of suffering, could lead to a new set of existential challenges centered around managing an astronomical population on a finite planet. Quality of life, individual freedom, and the very survival of a recognizable global ecosystem would be profoundly at stake.